Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you're ready to do some heavy lifting today
I think so.
because we are tackling what is, it's arguably the single most frustrating, fascinating, and personal question a human being can
Oh,
ask.
absolutely. It's the question that's ruined dinner parties for philosophers for, what, 2,000 years?
Right.
It is the ultimate mystery. It's the one thing you experience directly.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the only thing you experience directly, yet it is famously impossible to pin down.
We are talking about the architecture of awareness, but let's strip away the fancy title for a second. We're asking, how does a lump of biological meat,
About 3 pounds of gray jelly?
yeah, this jelly inside your skull,
Yeah.
how does it give rise to the feeling of falling in love or the taste of a decent espresso or just the sensation of being you?
Exactly. This is the hard problem.
Right.
How do you bridge that gap between objective physics neurons firing, chemicals rushing across synapses, and subjective experience?
The feeling itself.
The feeling. You can map the brain down to the last molecule, but nowhere on that map are you going to find sadness or the color red.
And usually when you go down this rabbit hole, you end up in the mystical section of the bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the stack of research we have today, we are taking a very different route. We are looking at a comprehensive materialist framework.
Right. And materialist here doesn't mean, we're obsessed with buying things. It means we are working under the assumption that consciousness isn't magic. It isn't soul floating around.
It's an engineering problem.
It's an engineering problem. The core idea running through all these sources, from neurobiology to computer science, is that consciousness is an emergent product of evolution. It's what happens when matter gets organized in a very specific, wildly complex way.
So we're going to try to reverse engineer the ghost in the machine. And we've got a pretty solid roadmap to get us there.
We do.
We're going to start with the brawl happening inside your head, how ideas basically fight for your attention.
Then we'll look at why your brain is less like a camera and maybe more like a fortune teller.
And we'll also dive into some theories that suggest the self, that person you think you are, might just be a useful illusion. Or maybe even a memory of something that already happened.
Which is a wild thought.
And finally, we'll touch on the hardware, the actual physics of how the brain creates this whole picture. But let's start with the theater, because I think most of us intuitively feel like there's a little person sitting inside our heads, right?
Oh, yeah.
Watching the world through our eyes, like they're in a cinema.
That is the classic intuition.
Yeah.
It's called the Cartesian theater. You feel like you're the CEO in the control room. But the research, particularly the global workspace theory from people like Bars and Dehane, it suggests that's not quite right.
Okay.
It's less of a control room and more of a stage.
Okay, so set the scene for me. What's the metaphor?
Imagine a pitch-black theater. The stage is massive. That's your working memory.
Mm.
It's everything your brain could theoretically be thinking about right now.
But it's dark.
Completely dark. There's only one small spotlight shining on the stage.
And that spotlight is my attention.
That's your attention. Now, the stage is crowded with actors. These actors are all different data streams. So one actor is the hum of the refrigerator, another is the pressure of your shoe on your foot, another is a memory of what you need to buy for dinner.
And they're all just kind of jostling around in the dark.
They are all processing unconsciously.
So as long as they stay in the dark, I don't experience them.
Right. They are influencing you. Your foot might shift to get comfortable, but you aren't conscious of it. Consciousness only happens when one of those actors manages to step into the spotlight.
And when they hit the light?
That's the global broadcast. Once an actor, let's say, the smell of smoke hits that spotlight, that information is basically shouted to the entire brain.
Oh, okay.
Suddenly, the language center knows about it, the motor cortex knows, the memory center knows about it. That broadcast is the consciousness.
So consciousness is basically a neurological loudspeaker system. It's the brain's way of getting all its different departments on the same page.
In the global workspace view, yes.
Yeah.
But Daniel Dennett, who is never one to let a comfortable metaphor sit unchallenged,
Of course.
he thinks even the theater gives us too much credit. He wants to tear down the stage entirely.
Dennett is always the disruptor. He proposes the multiple drafts model.
He does. He says there is no stage, and there is certainly no spotlight operator. He wants you to imagine instead a chaotic newsroom.
A newsroom.
You've got dozens of reporters, these are your neural circuits, all screaming out different versions of the story at the same time.
So one says, I see a snake.
And another says, no, it's a coiled rope. Another says, I detect motion. These are all parallel drafts of reality.
And there's no editor-in-chief to decide which one is true.
No editor, no boss. The story that gets published, the one that becomes your conscious thought, is simply the one that screams the loudest. Dennett calls it fame in the brain.
That is chaotic.
It is. The draft that recruits the most neural resources, it wins. It achieves fame. And that winning draft is what you experience as now.
But if there's no editor and no audience in the theater, then what am I? What is the self in this model?
In Dennett's view, you're a narrative trick. He calls the self a center of narrative gravity.
Okay.
Think about a physical object, like a donut. It has a center of gravity, right? A mathematical point in the middle.
Sure. But there's nothing in the middle of a donut. It's just empty space.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The self is just a fictional point we invent to make sense of all these competing stories. We need a protagonist for our internal movie, so the brain just invents one. But it's a user illusion.
That connects really well to Marvin Minsky's Society of Mind. He had this idea that the mind is built out of these little agents.
Minsky was just brilliant at breaking this down. He argued that the mind is a collection of simple, mindless little machines he called agents.
And these agents aren't smart.
Dumb as rocks. One agent might be responsible for lift arm, another for find edge of table. None of them are conscious.
But when you stack them up,
When you stack them up layer upon layer, you get a society of interactions so complex that it looks like intelligence. It's like an anthill. No single ant knows how to build a bridge, but the colony does. Your mind is just a colony of dumb agents doing their jobs.
that's a humbling thought. We are basically 3 dumb ants in a trench coat trying to buy a movie ticket.
In a way, yes. And Paul Thagard adds another layer to this. He says the mechanism that makes this all work is binding and competition. The agents have to compete, and the winners get bound together into a coherent experience.
Okay, so we've got this competitive, chaotic newsroom of dumb agents creating a story, but what are they actually writing about? This brings us to the second big pillar, the brain as a prediction engine.
This is a massive shift in thinking. For a long time, we thought the brain was passive, like a camera lens.
Right.
Light hits the retina, the brain processes the pixels and tells you, that is a cup. Input, then output.
And the new theory flips that on its head.
Completely. The predictive processing model argues that the brain is an active generator. It doesn't wait for the world to tell it what's happening. It's constantly guessing what's out there before the data even arrives.
This is where we get that fantastic phrase from Anil Seth, controlled hallucinations.
Yes, his beast machine theory. Seth argues that what you are seeing right now,
This room, my hands, this device.
all of it, it isn't raw data. It is your brain's best guess. It's a top-down prediction of what should be there based on all your past experience.
So I'm actually hallucinating my reality.
You are hallucinating, but it is, and this is crucial, controlled by the sensory data. If your brain predicts there's a coffee cup on the table and you reach out and your hand goes right through it,
Whoops.
that's a prediction error. The sensory data screams wrong, and the brain has to update the model.
Why would evolution build a brain that guesses instead of just seeing? That seems risky.
It's actually safer because it's faster. Processing raw data takes milliseconds, precious time you don't have if a tiger's jumping at you. If you have a good internal model, you can react to the tiger before you've even fully seen it. It's all about survival.
And this ties into Carl Friston's free energy principle, right? Which I'll admit is usually where my brain starts to hurt.
It is dense. But think of free energy in this context as just surprise. Biological systems hate surprise. Surprise means you don't know what's happening. And if you don't know what's happening, you might die.
So the whole point is to minimize surprise.
That's Friston's whole argument.
Right.
The entire drive of the brain is to make the world less surprising.
So we hallucinate the world to keep it predictable. We want to be bored, biologically speaking.
We want to be safe. We engage in what he calls active inference. We move our bodies to confirm our predictions. If I think this surface is rough, I run my finger over it to confirm it. I'm actively testing my hallucination against reality.
And when it matches up.
That's resonance. Stephen Grossberg's adaptive resonance theory says that consciousness is that moment of the click.
The aha moment.
It's when the top-down expectation meets the bottom-up data and they just lock into place. That stable state, that resonance, is the feeling of awareness.
So awareness is just the feeling of being right about your guess.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Now, if the world is a controlled hallucination, we have to circle back to the observer. Who is having the hallucination? We talked about the self being a narrative trick earlier, but there's some specific theories here that are, wow, they're pretty trippy.
This is where we get to Graziano's attention schema theory. And he asks a really practical question. Why do we claim to have this ghostly, non-physical feeling inside us?
Right. Why doesn't the brain just report, I am processing data? Why do we feel like we have a soul or a mind that's separate from the meat?
Graciano says it's a data compression issue. The brain is a machine. It needs to monitor its own activity. But the brain is so incredibly complex, billions of neurons, it can't model all that firing in real time.
It would crash the system.
It would crash the system. So it simplifies. Think of the dashboard in your car. When the check engine light comes on, it doesn't show you the diagram of the spark plugs and the pistons.
No, it just gives you a simple symbol.
Exactly. Graciano says the brain creates a simplified schematic model of its own attention processes, a caricature.
The caricature.
Yes, the brain builds this caricature of itself. And because it doesn't include the physical details, the neurons and the blood, it depicts that attention as a ghostly, non-physical essence. We think we have a soul because our internal dashboard is too user-friendly to show us the hardware.
That makes the self sound like a really slick user interface.
Mm-hmm.
But then Joshua Bach comes in and messes with my perception of time. He calls it the cortical conductor.
Bach adds this temporal twist. He suggests that what we call phenomenal consciousness, that rich feeling of being here now, is actually a memory.
Explain that. Because I feel like I'm here now.
But biology has a lag, right? By the time your eyes receive photons, turn them into electricity, send them to the visual cortex, and categorize the object, the event is already in the past. It might be 300, even 500 milliseconds ago.
So I'm living on a tape delay.
You are. Bach argues that the conductor, a system in the prefrontal cortex, integrates this information into a protocol for reflection. You aren't experiencing the present moment. You are accessing the memory of what the cortex just attended to.
So I am basically a story I'm telling myself about what just happened half a second ago.
If you can access the memory of the experience, that is sufficient for consciousness. The feeling is the act of reading that memory.
This brings up that distinction between first order and higher order theories.
Right. So a first order theory would say, I see a red apple, therefore I am conscious of the apple. The representation is enough.
Simple enough.
But higher order theories, like those from Hakuan Lao or Joseph Ledoux, say that's not enough. A thermostat represents the temperature, but it isn't conscious.
Right, you need a scanner watching the scanner.
Exactly. You need a higher level cognitive state that is monitoring the first one. Ledoux applies this to emotions. He says you don't feel fear just because your amygdala fires. That's a survival circuit. A rat has that.
Okay.
You feel fear when a higher order system reads that survival signal and categorizes it as, I am afraid.
So a dog might run from danger because of the survival circuit, but it might not be sitting there thinking, boy, that was terrifying.
That's the implication. It suggests consciousness requires a level of meta-monitoring. It's not just knowing, it's knowing that you know.
Okay, let's ground this again. We've talked about software predictions, agents, drafts, memories, but this is all running on hardware.
On wetware.
It's running on wet biological tissue. The notes mention a sweet spot where this hardware has to operate.
The critical brain hypothesis. This is pure physics. Imagine a pile of sand. If you add one grain, sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes you get a tiny slide. But every so often, you get a massive avalanche. That pile is at a critical point.
And the brain works like a sand pile.
In terms of information flow, yes. Systems that are too orderly, like a crystal or a ticking clock, can't store complex information. They're too rigid.
And systems that are too chaotic.
Like a gas can't transmit information. It's just noise.
So the brain has to walk a tightrope.
It operates right on the edge of chaos. It's a phase transition. And this is the only place where you get maximum information transmission without the system falling apart. If you tip too far into order, you get a seizure, every neuron firing in lockstep.
And too far into chaos.
You're unconscious or comatose. Consciousness literally lives on the brink of collapse.
That is poetic and slightly terrifying.
It is. And there's another hardware theory that solves a big problem for us. The binding problem.
Ray, we talked about how the brain breaks things down, color here, shape there, but we don't see a red blob and a round shape separately. We see a red apple. How does it glue that back together?
Especially if the neurons for red and the neurons for round are in different parts of the brain. The electromagnetic field theory, championed by people like McFadden and Jones, proposes that the glue isn't in the wires. It's in the field.
The energy field.
Every time a neuron fires, it generates a tiny electromagnetic field. When millions fire, they create a complex oscillating field that spans the brain. These theories suggest that this field is the seat of consciousness. It physically integrates the information across space.
So my mind isn't the neurons themselves, it's the energy field they generate.
That's the idea. It would explain why our experience feels smooth and continuous rather than digital and choppy. It binds the disparate parts into a whole.
Now, we've been very focused on what's inside the skull, but there is a school of thought that says we need to zoom out, the extended mind.
This is where we break the boundaries. Philosophers like Evan Thompson and Andy Clark argue that consciousness isn't skull-bound.
It's not contained.
It's an active process. It involves the body and the environment.
This is the idea that if I use a notebook to store memory, that notebook is effectively part of my mind.
Clark calls it active externalism. If an external tool is coupled tightly enough with your brain, if you trust it, access it instantly, rely on it, it functions as part of your cognitive circuitry.
So when I lose my phone and feel like I've lost half my brain, I actually have.
In a functional sense, yes. The boundary of you doesn't stop at your skin. It extends into your tools.
And speaking of tools, we have to talk about the ultimate tool, language. Parrington and Deacon argue this is what separates us from the chimps.
It's the human leap. We aren't just smart apes. Symbolic language changed the very architecture of our awareness. It created a whole new level of binding.
So.
Because we don't just feel pain, we have the concept of pain. We don't just see the sun. We have a word for sun that we can manipulate in our heads when it's dark. Deacon calls this self-organized constraint. We use symbols to stabilize ourselves against entropy.
So we can tell ourselves a story.
We can tell ourselves a story about who we are, and that story literally holds us together.
We talk ourselves into existence.
We do. Without language, you might have awareness, but you probably wouldn't have the autobiographical I that you cherish.
It's incredible to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just one theory winning the race.
No, and that's the grand synthesis mentioned in the source material. It's a nested hierarchy. You have to picture it as layers.
Okay, walk us through the stack.
At the bottom, you've got basic biological self-organization, Edelman and Thompson. The meat has to keep itself alive. Then on top of that, you have the navigational layer, Grossberg, Seth, Friston.
A prediction engine.
The brain predicts and resonates to move through the world safely.
And at the very top.
That's the human layer, Parrington. Symbolic language and higher-order monitoring that gives us this rich, complex self that can think about its own thinking.
It's all of them stacked on top of each other. The physics supports the biology, which supports the prediction, which supports the symbolic self.
Exactly. And understanding this matters because it changes how we see reality. We realize that reality isn't something we just watch on a screen. It's a construct we are actively participating in creating.
It puts a lot of responsibility on the observer. We aren't just an audience. We are the projector.
We are the architects.
Now, before we wrap up, there is one final thought from the sources that we absolutely have to drop on you. It comes from Nick Bostrom and the computational theories.
And honestly, it's the logical conclusion of everything we just said.
It is the thread that unravels the sweater. If consciousness is purely functional, if it's just about inputs, outputs, competition, and prediction, then it doesn't strictly depend on biology, does it?
No. If the self is just a result of data processing, then it depends on the computation, not the wet, squishy neurons.
It's software, not hardware.
It's software, not hardware.
And if consciousness is software,
then it can be run on different hardware, can be simulated. And if it can be simulated, we have to seriously consider the possibility that our reality is a computer simulation.
If we are just agents in a society of mind, who's to say those agents aren't running on a server the size of a planet?
It's the ultimate question. If the self is an illusion created by information processing, who's to say that processing is happening in a biological brain at all?
Something to think about next time you're controlled hallucinating a cup of coffee. You might just be a subroutine in a much larger program.
It certainly keeps things interesting.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the architecture of awareness. We hope we didn't break your brain too much.
Stay curious.
We'll see you next time.